I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, in 1952. I grew up in the Jim Crow system. And when I was in elementary school, the teachers told me that we live in a country in which everyone is created equal. And I realized they were lying. So that affected my subsequent schooling, and because I felt that the teachers don't necessarily tell you the truth. And so I was affected by the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement and the women's movement and the labor movement, other social movements in the 1960s that were related to each other and played a prominent role, in my opinion, in bringing about improved public health, despite the public health professionals. And that's influenced my entry into the field and my perspective since then.
So why public health as opposed to law or?
Oh yeah. Well, now you ask for something that actually is an example of the chaos of life. The chaos of life means that, by that I mean, sometimes we don't plan things, they're serendipitous. In 1976, I had been playing in a band to make a living. And I thought I would be a musician, but the band broke up. So I got a job at the Center for Demographic Studies at Duke University, which was seeking to fill the position of a research assistant, someone to Xerox articles for the faculty and maybe produce little tabular results on vital statistics and so on. And I had been working there for several months, and I didn't have a background in demography. So I was sitting in on the class that was offered to the graduate students. Midway through the semester, the director of the center called me to his office. And I was very nervous because normally he wouldn't acknowledge me because I was too lowly. But he told me that the university had a training grant, and that one of the graduate students, for personal reasons, had to leave in the middle of the semester. And if they could not fill the slot, they would have to return the money to the federal government. He said, "My wife works in the admissions office, and she can arrange for you to be admitted to the university to fill this position. You would receive this stipend, and your tuition to Duke will be paid, and so on. If you'd like to accept this opportunity, please tell me tomorrow." Well, I decided that I would never get such an offer again, so I might as well try it. And so I entered this program in demography, which of course is the basis of my interest in John Grant, which very first semester demography. And the training grant ended after I finished my master's degree. But by that time I had met some faculty in the Department of Epidemiology at UNC. And I was able to move here. So it was not a plan that I had, but just sometimes things happen and they turn out well. So I was privileged to begin with and was able to take advantage of the situation. So that's my story. So here I am today before you.
Hard to match that. It's hard to match that. So we wanted to be sure to provide an opportunity for you all to ask questions. And so let the floor be open for that.
Well, I had an interesting, it was, I guess, more of like a nuanced question about your interview. So you referred to, I guess, the Jim Crow South as apartheid and numerous times during your interview, and I was just curious as to why you chose to be classified as such. I do understand why you did that, but I'd just like to hear.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess it's a strong term, and I feel that it carries a weight because of the international knowledge of the South African system. And so it's partly rhetorical. Did you have, I'm interested in the basis of your question. Do you feel that it's inaccurate?
No, no, I did not. But I did a study abroad in South Africa, and I was able to experience like the teachings, I suppose, from living in a family for 15 weeks and getting that dichotomy of someone who's lived through it, and it's very much visceral, and then also someone who's growing up now and like a Mandela child. I guess that's what they classify them there, the Mandela children. And so it just sparked memories. And of course, I haven't lived through the Jim Crow South, but I imagine it was something similar. So.
Well, I would just comment that if you want to experience the Jim Crow South, you don't have to go very far. Because it's still with us, in my opinion. It's still with us. Even though it doesn't have its de jure form it used to.
I guess one of the questions we have been asked, I'm sorry, was that a pause for questions or?
Yes, absolutely.
We were asked to put together some big picture questions for Thursday's class about our role as public health practitioners and what research is and can be. And one of the things that I struggle with is using my education and critical thinking and this whole big systems approach that I believe in and have been taught, and using that on an interpersonal level with talking to communities that haven't had that exposure or that kind of educational access, and not being patronizing and not saying, well, this is the way I see the world and this is the role that I understand that communities like yours play in it. And getting pushback, like understandable pushback. So I know that you've gone out across North Carolina and you have this wonderful educational background and work experience. And how do you translate how you've been taught to see the world into working with people one-on-one, I guess. That wasn't very well asked.
So are you struggling with your with issues of how you can conduct yourself? Is that the
partially?
basis of your question?
I worked at a needle exchange in New York, and I sat in on an adult education class around HIV care and general kind of health practice, and there was so much misinformation in the room from participants, but also from the provider, from the instructor, that I don't want to walk in and say, oh, I know this because I went to school and I have been taught blah, blah, blah. And to see, to be sensitive to where that misinformation comes from and why it exists, because it's structural and there are forces that benefit from misinformation. But working to identify it in an interpersonal way that acknowledges why that exists or why that happens.
Yeah, that's a very difficult issue. So, at least for me, I would say that our education, while we need to be critical of our educators and our knowledge production system, we also need to appreciate it, because it really is very powerful and useful, not just to us, but potentially to people who have been largely excluded from the system. So I'm imagining that you've experienced perhaps beliefs that are people who are maybe IV drug users, who have beliefs that aren't founded in any kind of mechanisms that would be based in science, for example. And maybe their beliefs would even support their continued behaviors that are dangerous, or hopes that are unfounded, or whatever. And you might be reluctant to correct them in the way that a school teacher would correct a pupil who has the wrong answer to a question, which reflects your sensitivity and your concern for your privilege and your need to be respectful of people from where they come. So I would suggest that it's appropriate not to rush in to teach people the correct answer, especially as though it is the final answer. But over the course of developing a relationship, if that's possible, I think you can raise the topic in a sensitive way and ask questions to understand the foundation of beliefs and introduce people to new ideas that may help them protect themselves and protect others in their community, and have realistic ideas about what to expect from the future. And the problem in some ways is created by the clinical setting in which you don't have an opportunity to develop relationships, because our clinical settings are highly commercialized and are mostly run in a kind of industrial process. And that's not conducive to what you're seeking, from what I can hear from the way you put your question.
The thing that kind of triggered this, thinking of this as a question for class on Thursday, I was listening to the radio last week, and NPR was covering the South Carolina primaries and different rallies for Republican candidates. And they were interviewing this middle-aged white guy talking about why he supports Donald Trump so enthusiastically, and he talked at length about Donald Trump believing in raising the minimum wage and how he was going to fight and how he was going to use his business cunning and all of this stuff to lift up minimum wage earners. And he was so hopeful that he was going to use all of this experience to fight for a $10 or $15 minimum wage. And you could hear in the interviewer's voice that he knew Donald Trump doesn't believe in raising the minimum wage when he was asking this guy these questions. And after the interview was over, he said, and as a note, Donald Trump is against raising the minimum wage. And I felt so much pity and sadness for this guy who had based all of his hopes in this one candidate without facts and without substance. So how, I don't know, I don't understand how it's possible to address that kind of issue. So, I don't know if anyone else has ideas.
Trump represents, in some ways, the feelings of white Southerners who want to feel better than people of color. And who still are, whose culture is highly influenced by a kind of racial hierarchy that enforces injustice. So, I mean, those are the messages he gives out.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the person that you heard being interviewed couldn't say those things, or wasn't even aware consciously, and so latched onto something that wasn't even true. I don't know.
I saw the same thing. People believe what they want to believe, and then they rationalize. And when the HIV epidemic first hit, there were black people who believed that it was an experiment to exterminate black people, and I thought, oh no, nobody is that stupid. You'd have to ignore the history of African Americans in this country, and people believed it because they believed it for other reasons, not because that's what they actually believe. So anyway, but I do think interrogatives are important. Where did you get that from? How? I don't know why the reporter didn't pursue, where did you get the idea that he was supportive of, minimum wage, increasing the minimum wage? And I think that's one of the problems I have with journalists. I don't think that they try to get real answers from people. They want to get shock bits. So they let this poor guy go on to prove the point he wanted to make, which is these people who support Trump didn't know what they were doing. I think these background agendas. So anyway.
I have a few questions for you, Professor Wing. So I think one is thinking about something I brought in class, and it's more of a larger, 50,000-foot view of things, and it has to do, I think, a lot with this handoff of sorts of our generation, the generation before us, and thinking about just, in my estimation, they seem to be, maybe it's pessimistic, or maybe it's, not seeing the world through rosy-colored glasses, in the sense that it's these really large problems that don't seem to have any simple solution. Like the examples I can think of, or just like the destruction of the environment. Like, these are large issues that seem to, where the damage has been done in a way, and there's no really repairing that, and so it seems like it's on a certain trajectory, right, that's not good. And yeah, in my estimation, maybe not easily solvable. So my question is, what are your thoughts on that, just in terms of what that handoff looks like, and in terms of our generation, handling some of these issues that are only probably going to be larger and more important in more harmful? You know what I mean? Does that question make sense? In terms of just what are your thoughts on what that looks like? I mean, is it optimistic? Is it like, what are your thoughts in general, I guess?
Well, you remind me of a debate that's ongoing among geologists and paleontologists right now that some of you may have encountered in your reading. It's the debate over whether we are entering a new geologic era called the Anthropocene. Is that a term that you've read about? So the geologists classify eras of the past according to global events that are recorded in the strata of the Earth's crust. So they have to do with really major events, you know, a large asteroid impact or an extinction, a mass extinction when the fossil record changes. And there's a debate now over whether we are actually in a new era. I think that there's a convincing argument that we are in a new era. And, you know, you come from a part of the country that has the distinction of being at the core of one of the arguments about how to define the new era. Because then any era must have some physical record deposited in the crust of the Earth that would be identifiable for millions and millions of years. And your state is where the first nuclear weapon was detonated. And people have created a layer of radioactive elements that are going to be distinguishable for hundreds of millions of years around the world because of the use of nuclear weapons, mainly the testing, but of course most hideously the bombing of 2 Japanese cities by the United States. So the arguments about the Anthropocene also involve other signs that are geological of change, like changes in the carbon concentration in the atmosphere, which are occurring very rapidly and are leading to, I think, very reasonable predictions, not only of sea level rise, but of mass extinctions, not only on land, but in the oceans. And I think it's very reasonable to assume that with depletion of freshwater resources and rise of oceans and inundation of coastal cities, that we will see in the next century mass migrations of human populations and wars over resources and famines because of agricultural failures and epidemics. So that's pretty grim if you look at that, and would be a reason for despair, maybe, for the generations that will face those conditions if they occur. You know, in the face of that, what I would offer to you is the hope that we have from being able to participate with others in working against the forces that are bringing these conditions about. Because that's all we've ever had, is each other. And your generation has a lot of resources that past generations didn't have. And while there are, I think, dark sides to technology and the internet and our vastly expanded educational tools, there are also democratizing aspects of those technologies and aspects that make resources available to people who didn't have them before, and to be able to make connections between populations and organizations and people who have never been able to connect before. And I think, for me, I'd rather focus on that. And I would say that the source of hope is not about the achieving of some glorious end that's utopian. Rather, it's achieving the opportunity to work with other people of goodwill who are seeking a better world in which we might experience better public health conditions and self-determination for all peoples and basic human rights and so on. So there are lots of reasons to be not just concerned, but to even have despair. But that's, I think, destructive to our souls in a way. And it's much better to look on our colleagues as a source of inspiration and joy and creativity and passion for things that will make the world better.
Just a brief follow-up, if I may, on that. One thing we've talked about in class too, I guess has to do with, being students and thinking about what our next step is. So I think for me, a lot of just even being here has been a process of reconciling, because there are not a lot of people who, I guess, look like me, and so it's been this reconciling process of this ivory tower and understanding, what academia is, and so thinking about just in terms of once I graduate, practically speaking, the pros and cons we've discussed of academia, and going into that, which for me personally, I think, and frankly, I haven't at a lot of times felt very welcomed or very valued in terms of, my traditional knowledge base or worldview or methodologies or ontologies or anything that maybe is non-Western isn't as, I would say there isn't, from my point of view, being a student at this point anyway, there's not a lot of wiggle room or not a lot of celebration of that kind of creativity, at least in the core coursework, in my opinion. So anyway, my question is, what do you think about those pros and cons of, being in academia or not, I guess?
Well, I would first observe that you're in a department that has a particularly reductionistic approach to creating knowledge. And by that I mean not that it's about molecules versus societies. I don't mean that. I mean reductionism generically in the sense that it's about separating the effects of supposedly independent factors in whatever realm that might be. So I would argue that social epidemiology is typically just as reductionistic as molecular epidemiology. Especially as it adopts the methods of the discipline that are dominant in the United States, which are based on the idea of the experiment, in which all factors are held constant save one, and the influence of that factor on some outcome is considered to be the focus of the evaluation. So the experiment, which is an incredibly powerful method and very useful and very important in my opinion, essentially removes the system in which factors operate. And it does that, its source of power as a methodological approach is founded upon there being no system. For example, in an experiment, one never asks, why are those people exposed and those people not exposed? Or even potentially more profoundly, are the unexposed benefiting by exposing other people? Questions like that are removed because the experimenter is responsible for the exposures. And I hear you referring to other systems of understanding the world in which there is an appreciation of ecosystems and biological systems more generally that involve not just our species, but other species, and the physical world. And what's interesting is that those traditions do exist